Former FBI Director James Comey is now a self-avowed member of the resistance. Wow. So he went from being a Republican now to independent, and now he's apparently trying to coach Democrats. So what is the first thing that he tries to do? In doing so, he of course trashes progressives. Comey took to Twitter on Sunday to warn Democrats not to embrace the evils of socialism. According to the Washington Post, his message was an apparent response to the expanding group of Democratic candidates defining themselves as democratic socialists, a label that seeks to distance themselves from authoritarian forms of government many Americans associate with socialism. Now, before I get to Comey's tweet, which is fun, I want to explain that the most common understanding of democratic socialism has been espoused by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, Ocasio-Cortez explains it this way: in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no American should be too poor to live. Well, that seems far from the authoritarianism that some people link with socialism, but let's go further. She also believes that people should have access to dignified health care, the ability to send their children to college or trade schools, and that no one should feel precarious or unstable in their pursuit of housing. There doesn't seem to be anything out there in those statements or anything that she said about democratic socialism to believe that it is, number one, pure socialism, which it's not, communism, which it certainly is not, or any brand of authoritarianism. It sounds more like the community getting together to make sure that everybody's needs are met through a common pooling of taxes and redistribution via social programs. That doesn't sound so bad. Now, of course, James Comey does not believe that. He said, Democrats, please don't lose your minds and rush to the socialist left. This president and his Republican Party are counting on you to do exactly that. America's great middle wants sensible, balanced, ethical leadership. No, here's the thing. The president and the Republican Party, they actually got into power because of what we were doing before. What the left was doing before was, and this is the so-called left, the Democrats were doing, is pro-corporate policies. Pro-corporate centrism. So, for example, in elections, they'd be like, oh, general election, run to the right. I agree with the Republicans. I agree with the Republicans. Republicans are fantastic. Let us vote to give tax cuts to the rich. Let's vote to deregulate industry. That's not progressive. Or, of course, if there is something progressive that gets into, or that somebody gets into their head, like raising the minimum wage or, doing like a public option, Democrats are always the first ones to say, we can't do that. Republicans will vote against it. They won't vote for us. And that's the big problem, is you have Democratic politicians that continue to try to want to court Republicans. Only 26% of Americans identify as a Republican. That is a very, very small amount. There's a way more in the, independence. And independence, independents, they're not always truly independent. Some lean right, some lean left. So why don't you try to get the left-leaning independents and combine it with trying to appease your base? I know. Republicans, of course, fear their base. Democrats, unfortunately, loathe their base, which is why they would rather steal Republicans with milquetoast centrist policies that, unfortunately, are not very popular. But anyway, and let me give you an example of this. He says that the America's middle, right? The great middle wants sensible, balanced, and ethical leadership. That says nothing about policy, by the way. As far as policy goes, America's middle actually does want what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other Democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders are selling. They want, for example, 59% of Americans, according to a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll, want Medicare for all. So that socialized medicine program that James Comey says is so extreme, well. And socialist actually polls incredibly well with the American people. The minimum wage. Here's another example, right? Nearly 70% of Americans want to raise the minimum wage to at least $10 an hour. I think it should be $15 an hour and tied to inflation. But nonetheless, they want those raises in the minimum wage, even if it means they pay more. Because guess what? When asked, they want people to have who work to have a dignified existence. Going back to exactly what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was saying about dignity, right? Same thing. Once Americans realize, and many of them have, that when you have a Medicare for all single-payer style healthcare system, you will pay a little bit more in taxes. That's true. But you will never have to pay a health insurance company anymore. So in premiums. So that ends up actually saving you money because there's a gigantic overhead in these private health insurance companies in their plans. Why? It's because, look, they got to make a profit. They were a for-profit company, and so they charge you more so that they can actually take home more money. And they also go and they deny you claims so that they can keep as much money as possible for their bottom line. A single-payer healthcare system, for example, what we have right now is socialized healthcare. We have Medicare for people over 65. We already have socialized healthcare here in America for anybody over the age of 65. That actually has an incredibly low overhead, and it actually saves a lot of money. And look, certain studies say that if we actually did implement a nationwide single-payer healthcare system, we would save $17 trillion over the next 10 years. So there we go on that. Not only that, but nearly 80% of Americans also want want tuition-free public education. That includes now, for the first time, a majority of Republicans saying, yes, let's have tuition-free public education in college. These are the scary socialist policies coming from the left that James Comey is warning against. He's warning against people like Brent Welder. He's warning against people like Kenyella Ng. He's warning against people like Abdul Al-Sayed. He's warning against people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Why? It's because he's a Republican at heart. He's a Republican at his core, even if he dropped the label over Donald Trump. So it's ridiculous that now he's decided he's going to play armchair quarterback for the Democrats in the midterms. Get out of here. And look, here's the thing. There are people not only on the progressive side that are saying, Comey, get the hell out of here. You ain't my Comey. You also have establishment Democrats. So pretty much everybody hates Comey. Let me give you an example here from a progressive, Kurt Anderson. He tweeted out, what do we mean by the socialist left? Comey's scaremongering phrase. Apart from the goal of a healthcare system like those in the rest of the rich world, and a few things America's used to have, like cheap public higher education and higher taxes for rich people? That is a devastating tweet and a great, great point. Now, let me give you some examples of the establishment. Here is Ronald Klain, former chief of staff to Vice President Joe Biden, Vice President Al Gore. He said, last time you practiced politics, it resulted in a fiasco of historic proportions. Tommy Viator, former spokesperson for President Barack Obama's National Security Council, said, we've got this covered. No one is asking for your advice. As we saw during the campaign, your judgment isn't great. All the best, everyone. So not even establishment Democrats like Comey, although, of course, on the substance, I think they largely agree. Oh, we shouldn't go too far left because we got to get the Republicans in the suburban areas. That's what we got to do. Those who are turned off by Donald Trump and his rhetoric. But look, mainly these Democrats are blaming James Comey because they're still mad about 2016. Now, I've explained before, Hillary Clinton's, her campaign died the death of 1,000 cuts. One of those cuts happened to be James Comey coming out and saying, oh, there's an investigation into Hillary's emails when there actually wasn't. So there's that. But anyway, Comey, as lonely as he is, has found solace in a friend, Joe Lieberman. A one-time Democrat and vice presidential nominee, Lieberman, who is now an independent, urged voters in New York's 14th congressional district to defy the results of the Democratic primary and vote for Representative Joe Crowley on the working families line of the ballot. So he's another guy that Democrats are like, hey, piss off. Lieberman, of course, is responsible for voting in favor of the Iraq War, also making sure that the ACA did not have a public option. He continues to support money in politics and obviously fights against progressive ideas. Birds of a feather, man. Lieberman said Democrats would only succeed this fall with, quote, sensible mainstream candidates. And of course, what they mean by mainstream is people who continue to take corporate money and work for corporate donors. So, as I said before, birds of a feather, man, they are both deathly afraid of progressives taking over the Democratic Party, not because they're wrong. No, on the contrary, it's because they're right. They're right. These policies are, because these policies are incredibly popular. Now, again, Lieberman and Comey, they're in their Washington bubble. Comey is, of course, a cop. And he's right-wing, massively right-wing. And so he doesn't believe in any of these policies. He doesn't think it's going to help. But he has no finger on the pulse of the American people. He has no idea what the American people actually want. And what they want are progressive policies. And what they don't want are people like Comey sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. In fact, I want to end up with this hilarious tweet from Melissa McEwen. She says, quote, and this really kind of sums it up, I'm as likely to take political advice from James Comey as I am to wash my face with turpentine and dry it with a cheese grater. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.